May the House call to order, but we will stay on recess until we reach a quorum. Thank you very much. We're still on recess till we reach a quorum.
said. The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. We are on SB 276 TMT L21 P148 4:34 p.m. There has been an objection by Senator Brown. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Zuzuz Masi, Madam Chair. So I rise in support of this amendment because I do have concerns about taking away funding that the agency actually was relying on. And so we look at, in some of the earlier comments, it amounts to about $250,000, which doesn't sound like a lot considering the billion-dollar budget that we have today. But when you look at the total amount of money that the State Historic Preservation Office is getting, it accounts to about a third of their budget. And this is the money that they were planning on using. And having been through many programmatic agreement workshops, many of these meetings, it's abundantly clear that we are underfunding the State Historic Preservation Office. This is one agency, a regulatory agency, mind you, that has a critical need and a critical shortage. I mean, I've talked about Guam EPA. This is the other part of the equation when we talk about cultural preservation. And, you know, everybody in the community has heard about the destruction of Magua, the destruction of our historic sites. And, you know, I know pretty well that the amount of work that comes from having to oversee the programmatic agreement and the military buildup projects is tremendous. This agency, this very tiny agency, is deluged with a huge amount of paperwork and with timelines. So they are under federal timelines to address projects within 30 days. And the staffing is definitely inadequate to the amount of work that they have to oversee. And that's just projects within the fence, right? There's still many projects going on outside the fence because what the military buildup is doing, it's actually accelerating development outside the fence as well. And so I raise a lot of, I feel there's it would be a mistake. It would be a mistake to take away this very vital funding from one of our regulatory bodies. And if we, as a body, would like to prioritize cultural preservation and protection of our ancestral sites, I think, you know, there's a way to figure this out. You know, it's unfortunately that when we're up against the budget, it appears to be like a zero-sum game. You know, you take away from one to add to another. But I think there's another way. I think if we put our minds together, we can figure this out without having to disrupt an agency which serves a vital function And, I would like to sit with, the Appropriations Committee, with, those that are advocating for Guam Preservation Trust, which does serve a very important function as well. And I do understand that their funding has been decreased, and, we see the impacts of that. That, many of the buildings that they've renovated are in disrepair. So I see the need that it's all around, right? We need to preserve our cultural sites. We need to, help preserve our, architectural sites as well. But it doesn't have to be at the expense of another. And so I think that to not restore the funding, which is about a third of the budget, would be a mistake. And so I rise in support of this amendment to Dismasi.
On the amendment, Senator Nelson, Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Earlier in the month, there was a concern that the way the substitute bill number 276-36, that there was a concern that that some of the provisions in the bill that made changes to the Guam Code annotated were not specifically written out. And so I have an amendment, and really it's just to show the change in the original code and then to input what is now currently in the bill. But apparently now that doesn't seem like this is the issue. The issue is about the funding. And just a point of information, Madam Chair, in fiscal year 22, which was last year, the Historic Resources Division received $470,246. And this year, the Appropriations Chair, working with the Appropriations Chair, they are now receiving $628,521. And so really, this is a twofold purpose, because we know that the Historic Resources Division needs additional personnel. So we worked together to ensure that there was money to put in place to hire those additional personnel. And secondly, this is also to capture the 100%, which was the original law for the Guam Preservation Trust Fund, that's where it would go. Now this law was changed in another budget bill where it stated that only 50% of all fees collected would go to the Guam Preservation Trust Fund. And I believe that was done in the 32nd or 34th Guam Legislature. And so we're looking to correct what was done and restore this fund. I heard our colleagues earlier mention of a bill, and it's absolutely true that there is a bill that we can deliberate as well, but we're addressing the budget now. For what reason, unbeknownst to me, that bill has not moved on session floor, nor has it been added. We had a public hearing for it, and we reported the bill out to give the opportunity for the main sponsor to move the bill on session floor. And so now we're addressing this issue because we know that we are moving into the next FY, and we need to ensure that everything is right-sized. And so I cannot support deleting the provision of Guam Preservation Trust. Just a couple months ago, we went down to UMATIC, where the Guam Preservation Trust worked very hard to receive funding for one of the schools to turn into a community center for learning and also to be used as areas for educational purposes. This is FQ Sanchez. And so, FQ. And so, and so now, it's okay when we go down there and we applaud the work that they do, but when it comes to showing them that we truly support them, it would be duplicitous of us to remove this provision. We're so quick to give them accolades when there's a ribbon cutting, when they make progress, but yet when it comes to ensuring that they are given equity for what the original law intended, now we're standing at an arm's length saying, oh, this is not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to ensure that they receive the 100% as what the original law intended. And we also ensured that the Historic Resources Division was funded additionally more money from FY22 for this current year, FY23, so that they can be able to hire more personnel and address the needs of the military buildup. But also, Madam Chair, we should not be using state resources to address the challenges of military realignment. That's what negotiations are for. And so it would behoove those that are in charge of Historic Resources Division to come to the table with military partners with better negotiation practices. So I cannot support this amendment at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
On the amendment, Senator Dueñas, you are recognized.
Jesus Mossy, Madam Chair. And once again, we find ourselves in a position of having to deal with, or trying to deal with, a bill within the budget structure. And had we heard the bill and seen it all the way through, we couldn't have made the discretionary decisions to identify what our priorities are. Our good friend from Talampago does not come to this issue from a position of not being educated and not having engrossed herself in this issue, much like the retiring speaker has discussed. So, we debate, but what we're debating is priorities. And some of my colleagues on the floor talk about the priorities of how the money was distributed when it was taken from its core function, and saying that, no, we can't do that. Well, then where are the priorities? Like my good friend from Chalampago, Senator Brown, that's the point that she made. In $1 billion+ budget, and I've talked to folks up at DPR. In fact, when they came down, we had a very robust presentation from the administrator saying, but wait, there's more. And I concur with the priorities that he identified. The problem is that he received a funding source, and the division received a funding source that took away from historic preservation. Yet we sit down and we ask Joe when he comes in here, Mr. Kanata, what is your priority? What do you want to do? What is your top 5? Is it the Archbishop House? And the list goes on. They're all our priorities, senators. But we just don't have the capability of making all of them our priorities, so we've got to pick and choose. And that's the problem when we get into this particular section of the budget, where we start doing this. and we haven't heard the bills that are critical to the situation. Because had we done that, then we could have said, what are the priorities when we were in the prior sections of the budget? And so I understand why. In fact, the rules of engagement, Madam Chair, is the fact that we don't pull money from other critical entities or entities to begin with unless we find where the money's going to come from. That's the purpose of the budgetary process. But yet now, we're lining out what our priorities are. And you're not dealing with tens of millions of dollars. You're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars for critical functions. But yet, all of a sudden, when we had a bill that would address it, that would say, okay, as a matter of fact, we recently had a round of bills that came down here where we were, we brought Joe Kanata in. We made sure that, because we were appropriating, we got the $3.5 million for, Simon or Sanchez, the school to become what it needed to be. We were all just running towards doing that. But then, and that's the time when we asked him, what are your priorities? We were all so involved in it. But then the good senator says, hey, just give them back the thousands of dollars that it takes them to be able to do what they do. But don't take away from DPR's mission. Don't take away from the other missions. Identify it. Fund it. Let the governor tell us, this is my priority. You're using special funds here, funds that generate revenue to do these things. Under the original design was designed to do it. But then instead, now you make these critical areas fight over scraps. This is not the right way to do it. And so I agree. Let it be figured out. If there's any authority that the governor has, it's to say those other entities have been fully funded or they're under an executive agency, I can transfer money there. Because, but wait, there's more. Says my friend Pat. And I agree with him. And we got to go out, and we got the military buildup, and they're asking us to go out and, manage these excavations, and we got to get, individuals who have all this expertise in making sure that when these excavations are done, if we find artifacts, we got to mitigate, we got to do this, we got to do that. So we're pitting these guys who fight over the scraps against each other, which is crazy because we have the money. So this is not about what you do when you go into an amendment to where you're saying, oh, now that guy's a bad guy because he took money from here. Or that senator is a bad lady because she pulled this money from here. No, it's about, did you figure it out? Did you put the fiscal responsibility into it? Did you fund those other areas to where you could handle this original funding source that was derived to sustain historic preservation? We say we're committed to these things, but then we play with it. And that's what's wrong. Because nobody on this floor that can support this amendment or not support this amendment in terms of being able to take it away because it's something that would restore the funding to historic preservation. Nobody's saying they don't want to fund the other operations. What they're saying is that we want to restore what was designed for a critical area. And if you really care about those other areas, then show it. That's what this is really about. So with that, Madam Chair, I really do, have an objection to us in this final throngs of this administration, or this budget, in the miscellaneous provisions, having us sit around here and stand up on a soapbox to claim our particular loves for different areas, particularly when it comes to cultural preservation. We should not be doing that. We should have already prepared for that and known that if we are going to go down the road to restore these heroes that we bring down and laud their accomplishments of what they do, not make the other folks who have to do the other regulatory processes sit there and go, well, you left me out to dry. No, we didn't leave you out to dry. There are other funding sources and plenty of money to fund you to do what you need to do. But wait, there's more. Give them more. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. On the amendment, would you like to close on the amendment, Speaker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm a little bit maybe confused, but as to what the emotion that we are throwing into using, and I want to remind everybody, building permit fees. These are not fees that were ever designed for Guam Preservation Trust. They were at a certain point dedicated to the Guam Preservation Trust, but they are building permit fees. And because Guam prioritizes preservation, they prioritize dedication of a reliable funding source there. And then over the years, after giving the Guam Preservation Trust a very unique status, it's not a line agency, it's an independent almost, it's a public nonprofit corporation with the power to seek its own grants, the power to acquire title to property, the power to get a line of credit, the power to bypass Guam procurement laws, many things, to be its own entity, to sue and be sued in its own name. It's had years, and it has done an excellent job, and it is doing an excellent job with the funding that it is receiving and the extra funding that it has received, especially particularly during this period, and with the resources that it has acquired, the connections that it has acquired nationally. I believe that they will continue to do that. And so I'm asking that we allow a status quo and that we not defund the Guam Museum by $250,000 and defund the Department of Public Works' engineering, especially when they lack an engineer, by $250,000, because then we are affecting critical agencies who have no other means of getting the income like the Preservation Trust has. And don't forget that, they're equally important. I have no qualms of any of the arguments that's been made. And if we have increased the budget of the Preservation Trust in this budget, as one of my previous colleagues has said, then by all means, they can continue to manage with the current and the increase that they are receiving, while we continue to fund and not defund the Department of Chamorro Affairs, or to defund the engineering position at the Department of Public Works, which is in critical need, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Speaker.
So I'm asking for a status quo, by removing this provision to continue a status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. There has been objections made to this amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Senator Blas?
Yes,
Just so that we can understand what this amendment is. This
Point
amendment,
of order, Madam Chair. The closing statement has already been given.
I'm just asking for a clarification on what the amendment is.
Please state your point of inquiry.
It's just, this is the amendment as presented by the speaker. That's the one where,
That's correct. The amendment
all
has
I
not
was
been
asking.
amended. Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
correct. We are now voting on SB 276 TMT L21, page 148, submitted at 4:34 PM on the Guam Preservation Trust income. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Amendment fails. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized on the Rigel amendment. Colleagues, we are now on SB 276 CER L11 P149, submitted at 1:35 PM. This is regarding the Cannabis Control Fund. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On this amendment, it's to, you notice that the underlying section there identifies the, to add a line. That's to create the Cannabis Control Fund. Specifically, there is hereby created and separated apart from all other funds of the government of Guam, the Cannabis Control Fund. All fees, fines, penalties, and other charges resulting from the licensing and enforcement of adult cannabis use in Guam shall be deposited in this fund. Expenditures of the fund shall be be by appropriation from the Legislature in Guam, except that 60% of all funds shall be appropriated to the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center for the following purposes. 20% shall be used for cannabis prevention and education program for those under 21 years age. 40% shall be used for substance abuse, treatment, prevention, and education. And the remaining 40% of all funds upon the fund shall be appropriated to the Department of Revenue and Taxation for carrying out enforcement and regulations of adult use cannabis and support its responsibility as set out in this chapter. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. On the amendment, on the Rigel amendment, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, Speaker Terlahi, you are
I
recognized.
just have a point of inquiry. Where was the 40% going before?
Senator San Augustine, do you yield to the question?
Give me a few seconds so I can contact the,
We'll take a brief recess. The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized, or, I'm sorry, Senator San Augustine on the question.
I'll waive my question, Madam Chair. Thank you. No objection.
Okay. On the amendment, are there any objections? Hearing none, amendment passes. Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized. We are on SB 276 TMT L11 P149 submitted at 10:15 a.m. This
Thank
is
you.
the WAR Claims Amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment is to add language to our current budget bill, which would amend the Guam World War II Reconciliation Act of 2021, and the way that we pay out the claims that are authorized right now under that act. This does not authorize any additional claims. This amendment merely affects the payment of those claims. So currently, the bill, as it was introduced, compensates victims, in the amounts equal to the authorized compensation levels in the federal government program. When the law was established, Public Law 36-62, on November 2021, it established the rules for the local war claims program. So in the session discussion on that bill, maybe you might recall that the language said, we're going to pay these claims to anyone who was alive, but those who were eligible but had died, meaning those who had died during the war, who were eligible, those who had died, who had survived the war and lived up until, the filing of, the national date, though they would be eligible, but if you died despite being eligible, you're not going to get paid until the very end of the program. And so I tried at that time to make an amendment to say that with the $10 million we were appropriating, they would get paid same as the others. They would not have to wait till the end. That amendment did not pass, but I'm asking you again, my colleagues, that I'm serving right now as a member of the adjudication committee for these war claims. We've been adjudicating these claims on a bi-weekly basis every 2 weeks, and we've pretty much completed all of those that are presented to us, in other words, that are cleared. And it's very clear at this point that we may not use the entire 10 million if we continue to see claims at the current rate. We will not get enough claims to exhaust the 10 million. There have been 109 claims. We've adjudicated almost all of those to date. Payment of those would equate to only a little over 1 million of the 10 million. So it's become clear that we can afford to pay out the decedents, meaning those that died during the war, and those victims who survived the war but have died prior to getting paid right now, instead of waiting until the end of March, which the current law requires. So again, it would authorize that those claims of people who died during the war and those claims of people who were eligible for the federal program but subsequently passed away can be compensated immediately and not wait until March. So if you see the language, they talk about two types of we talk about a compensable Guam victim, and then the deceased compensable Guam victims. And so Guam victims are those that actually survived the war, and then deceased compensable Guam victims are those that are deceased since then, and then there were another class called the decedents. So this is to allow both of them to be paid right now, since we've only spent one of the $10 million, and to avoid any additional delay. So, Madam Chair, I would ask my colleagues if they could please support this amendment. This would allow the Department of Administration to pay those claims that are already adjudicated, approved, cleared, just waiting for payment to pay on those claims. Seduce Masi.
Seduce Masi, Speaker, on the amendment. Senator Brown, you are recognized.
I wanted to ask of the speaker, how much are we talking about? Because again, that's a substantial list. How many survivors did we have that lived through the war but have since died? Because many of us, oh goodness, if your parents or grandparents were here during the war, as I would say, probably every one of us have family members. What number are we talking about? And if you're saying the 10 million is going to cover it, what does that add up to in dollars and cents? Because again, we're asking to pay that. I mean, I don't object to the suffering. My goodness, all of our people went through during the war, and the only disadvantage they had was that they passed away before this issue was ever resolved. But again, for me, I go back to my fundamental argument I had the last time we addressed this issue. I'm very bothered because the money is of no value to my loved ones, my grandparents that were here that suffered during the war. You know, they'll never get to experience the benefit of that. When they needed it the most, they didn't have it when they had to rebuild their lives and the lives of their children and their family after the war. And what does bother me, and I'm going to continue to reiterate, it's not the money, because the money's of no value to them. Maybe we say it's just because it's going to go on to their family members, that's justice. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know, but they're not here. And I'm not devaluing the suffering of what they went through, and thank God they survived, because I certainly wouldn't be here. Maybe many of us here would not be here today if it was not for them. But I'm very bothered by the idea, the fundamental idea that we are asking the victims and the descendants of the victims of this war to compensate themselves. That's what's bothersome to me. It's not the money. Money is, gosh, money can go through your fingers like water. Maybe sand you can hold on to just a little longer. But that's what we're asking, my dear people. We're asking our own people that were victimized by this war that was not of their making, who suffered, who were raped, who were tortured, who watched other family members die in front of them. And we're asking them to pay themselves for their victimization. My mother had an older brother who was 9 at the time, who was interned at Menengun, who was starving, and in that little river there found a little fish to eat. And he had his tongue cut out of his mouth. Because he was hungry. And you wonder, how could someone be so brutal, so cruel? And how many of our people suffered, needlessly died? So it's not an issue of care or compassion. But think about that, colleagues. We are asking our people to pay themselves for the atrocities that were brought upon them, and then what? We call that justice, we call that fair, that maybe we can close the books and say, oh, we paid our people. This whole battle over the years with the U.S. federal government, who essentially freed the Japanese government from their obligation for the destruction and harm they brought to our people, It became their obligation. And they only chose to partially address it. And now we're saying, oh, we're going to compensate. All the efforts of all those that came before us to go to Washington, to be recognized with this issue, to be acknowledged by the federal government who took away that responsibility from the Japanese. Could they have paid themselves? Would that be, if I were to talk to Ms. Beatrice Emsley again and ask her, Mrs. Emsley, who in her late 70s went all the way to Washington, D.C. to impeach Cruz, the late Mayor Vicente Bernardo, to go to the U.S. Congress and testify to tell their story, their challenges, the horrors that they experienced, for Mrs. Emsley to talk about what she went through as a young girl, to be practically beheaded, to crawl out of a grave. Would we see, Mrs. Emsley, do you think it's okay if we pay you out of your own money? Would that be acceptable to you? Would that give you the acknowledgement, Mrs. Emsley? I think we need to think about what we're doing, because the money is of no use to those that have gone. It's no use to my grandparents. It's no use to my grandmother that I never met, that died 3 years after the war from illness. So we think somehow the money is going to fix it or make it whole. I don't think it does. And on a most fundamental issue that I stand on, I do not think it is right to have the victims of our community, the descendants of our community, pay for this. Because this is, if we go with the argument of director of administration, all the money goes in one big pool. And that's money we're taking away from other needs in this community. If I were to ask my grandfather, Grandpa, do you think we should pay this money in your name, which you will never get or experience, or do we give it to your grandchildren? What's your priority? So colleagues, let's not think in any way if we approve this and we're going to take the money and we got the money, let's just pay it and be done with it, and we can bless it and say, oh, we've acknowledged compensation and recognition to our dear people of Guam, all those that suffered. I just think it's wrong. It's wrong to ask our people to pay themselves for the atrocities that were brought upon them. I don't think that says the message that probably even my grandfather would want to see. I just don't think it's right to ask our people to pay themselves for their suffering. We don't ask other victims to do that. Why should we of our World War II? So for those that survived and have since died in the 70-plus years before this issue could be resolved. And I feel for them, because I'll tell you, they suffered and they sacrificed, and they will never, ever benefit from this because they're no longer here. And I think for us to ask them and their descendants and their own people now to pay themselves for it, which is really what it is. This is what we're doing here. I think it's fundamentally wrong. I think in principle it is wrong. With that, Madam Chair, I have no further comment with regards to this proposed amendment.
Point of information,
Please
Madam
state your point of information.
This amendment, I agree with the previous speaker about what's justice and what is not justice, but this amendment has nothing to do with the funding source. That funding source has been declared by previous law. This amendment is simply whether they get paid in March or they get paid today. That's it. Everything else, I think, that was said was not relevant to this amendment. It's not touching the funding source. It's touching the date of payment, March versus today. Simple like that.
Thank you, Speaker. On the amendment, Senator Dueñas, followed by Senator Blas.
So I guess I'll approach this by starting with a question to the mover, because I'm seeing in here the language that is reminiscent of, and I'm okay to be wrong here, the decedents And that takes us back, or maybe it doesn't, but that's why I'm proffering the question, to the mistake that we passed and then had to repeal in a prior bill. Are these adjudicated claims the original class as identified who missed the deadline in the original filing that this $10 million was established for those adjudicated claims? Madam Chair, I proffer that to the mover. Is that what we're talking about here?
Do you yield to the question, Speaker?
Yes, I would yield to that question. First of all, the adjudication committee, the local war claims adjudication committee has no authority to adjudicate any claim that was not covered by the law that we pass in this legislature. So those are the claims that we're talking about. And they're adjudicated, and there are some that are unpaid because the law that we passed said they don't get to be paid until March. Even though they were eligible, they were adjudicated, we were holding off on payment of those survivors until after we paid all the living. But after 1 quarter, we haven't spent even a quarter of the money. So again, a deceased compensable Guam victim is one that was living on December 23, 2016, who suffered that injury or subjected to forced labor or any of those other categories, and that they've been deemed adjudicated according to the law, which mirrors the federal program. I don't know how I can say it any simpler, except that this changes no eligibility, it changes payment date, meaning those who you have already decided, or the legislature has already decided are eligible, do not have to wait. If this amendment can pass, would not have to wait until March to get paid. They would get paid as soon as their claims are adjudicated.
And that's the point of asking with the same clarity my question. Simply because, let us be clear, this body went through a lot to have to address this issue. And so yes, that clarity is important. It's important to ensure that there's no doors to be opened unless there is full disclosure on what the
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please state your point of personal privilege.
Is there some inference that there is not full disclosure here in my amendment?
No, absolutely not. My same personal privilege. I don't need to be interrupted like what others have said on this floor when I'm making a comment. I know how I speak. I don't infer. I make it clear. When a comment's made on this floor, I don't know how to make it any more clear, then I get to make my point clear as well. And it's clear that in order to be clear, the reason why we're doing that is because we had a lot of issues with a mistake that was made before. That's why clarity is paramount. Personal privilege is clarity. That's all I'm saying. Madam Chair, one of the most important things we do here, we put things on the record so there's a reference to go back to. Because when we got here the last time and had to clean it up, it was because there was ambiguity.
Point of information, Madam Chair. There was no ambiguity on the floor. There was an error in engrossment.
There was an error in engrossment that had to be corrected. And it created ambiguity, Madam Chair, for those in the public who had a hope. We're dealing with people here. Let's not kid ourselves. We all go to the same stores. We all go to the same gas stations. We all go to the same places. We're decedents. We listen to the radio. We're decedents who believe that justice should extend beyond the date, that this issue was adjudicated and was handled in Congress and came to this body. We all get the same questions. Are you going to help us? What happened to that? That's the purpose for clarity, Madam Chair. Not everybody gets to sit at home and listen to this session and know line for line and discussion for discussion that we had. That's the purpose of the clarity. If I'm going to make an inference, Madam Chair, I'm going to be direct. But I'm going to be clear, particularly in this time of the year, that we speak on the record and have issues on the record so there's no misunderstandings. Before the exchange, I think the mover of the amendment was speaking with clarity, and so I understand it. And I'll listen to the balance of the debate. But I will not be impugned for my method of making a point as well. Because when I go gas the truck tomorrow, and that same person approaches me and says, my mom died, my dad died, they had their claim in, we feel robbed, I can say, you know, look, we're trying to compel the federal government to make your family whole because it was their responsibility and it was decided that there was a date certain. If we can get there, my friend, maulig para hago. Tan todo y familia. But other than that, it's important to understand the resources we have that we need to use today for the purposes of all of our people. Si Dios mopsi, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. On the amendment, Senator Blas, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have a question for the author. And
Please state your question.
And I will. And I just guess heard it in her initial presentation. Is this an amendment so that those individuals will have to wait until March, don't have to wait until March? There's funding up for it now. This amendment will allow for that payment to be made today
Do you yield to
as
the
opposed
question?
to March?
Yes, I would yield to that question. Absolutely, yes, that is correct.
Okay.
That's exactly what this amendment does.
Well, then, the next follow-up question to that, Madam Chair, if the author could yield, where did this March deadline come from?
I'm happy to yield to that question as
Sure.
well, Madam Chair. That March deadline came from the Guam Legislature, saying we're not going to pay those people, certain people, until the end of the year. I tried to make an amendment at that time to remove that March delayed payment and make it get paid the same time as the rest of the claims are being paid. That failed. So that March deadline came from the Guam Legislature over my objection.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair, but you know, Madam Chair, I find nothing in this amendment that makes reference to March, which is why I asked the question. The only reference that I have here is found in page 2 of this, in a crossed-out section. The director shall make payments under this subsection only after all payments have been made under subsection A1 of this section. I don't see any reference to March here, which is why I asked the question, and I appreciate the answer. Furthermore, I find this confusing. In some cases, we talk about compensable Guam victims and survivors of deceased compensable Guam victims. And then in other cases, in the case of compensable Guam decedents or a deceased compensable Guam victim. I'm very aware of the federal statute. Okay, and if we were following the federal statute, first off, the question that I have, and it's not so much to the author, is the question to the body, is this extending this further than what was intended to be provided to? I guess, again, you know, I'm looking at this, and in some cases we call them victims, in other cases we call them decedents, in some cases we call them compensable Guam decedents, in some cases we call them compensable victims. It's confusing. I appreciate the author's intent in the bill. I agree. If there is a holdup and there's no need for the holdup for those that have been adjudicated for them to be able to receive it, then they should receive it. But I think that this amendment appears to go further than that. And I'm just reading back and forth on this. And if this were the case that we just don't want them to wait until March, then I think the only thing that this amendment truly needs is to strike out those words in section on page 2, in section 2, if that's all that's necessary. Everything else is confusing, and I don't want it to be confusing. I want it to be succinct and concise. And so, it's not that I'm going to, I don't want, first off, if that was the case, then that's all that's needed. And if that's all that's needed, I support it. But I don't see the necessity for the rest of the language. If you can allow me 1 minute to talk to the author so that I can understand the need for the rest of the language.
We'll take a brief recess.
Thank you.
The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. Senator Blas, you're still recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak to the author of the amendment. It was able to clear some of the language on it. Just for the edification, it does not change the definition of who the compensable victim is. Okay? And just for point of clarity for the people that are watching, it does not change the definition. What it provides is the opportunity for those individuals based on law that would have had to have waited because it's, while we've authorized and we've appropriated so much already, this is not an appropriation measure. This just allows the commission to move forward and being able to adjudicate the rest of the claims that they have that have sin past muster based on the law that has been provided, the United States law and the Guam law. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to them.
Thank you, Senator Blas. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious. Maybe the author can answer the question. The question of there's approximately 7.5 million. How many people are waiting to get cleared to get paid? Because I support that. If they're already on the list, they've been adjudicated, everything's good to go, pay them. That I can support it. That's what it says in this bill, but I don't see that saying that to a certain extent. And then the next question I ask is that after we do this, does this amendment keep it open for whatever numbers there may be, and could we get an estimate? So we make sure that the 7.5 will carry it. We don't want to give the false impression that 7.5 will take care of them, of everyone, and it doesn't. I just want to, I'm in support of this to compensate whoever's qualified, applied, done, get it done. But if we don't even have that number, and that 7.5 is not enough, I'm just concerned is that a lot of folks that are waiting in the wind saying, they're not going to get compensated, but we need to promote that they need to apply so we'll know. But to open the door and just leave it wide open kind of concerns me. 7.5 exists, it's left over. I'm no problem with that one. Need to pay people that applied, that are adjudicated, and cleared, and good to go. I say pay them. I'm in full support of that. As long as we're not opening the door saying that 7.5 is going to cover and it may not. Whoever may apply after this pass. And then we have to figure out where we're going to get the money for it. At the same token, I'd like to see the federal government pay for this instead of us just paying it out of our own pocket. Because that's all we've been doing is paying for our own people's, the atrocity to our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. On the amendment, I'm sorry, do you yield to the question? The main question, please.
I just wanted to know how many folks or applicants are cleared and ready to go. I don't need to know names, I just need to know numbers. Because numbers, simple math.
Speaker Terlahi, do you yield to the question?
I have those numbers. I only have part of those numbers here. Shoot, just a 1 second. If I could just have a 1-minute recess. I
Take
will
a brief
find those.
recess. Committee of the Whole is back from recess. Speaker Terlahi on the San Augustine question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a complete report, but I do know that as of our August 2022 meeting, we had adjudicated 119 claims, and that those were all of the claims that had been cleared by DOA. And that's 119, and that at the July 18, 2022, as of July 18, 2022, we had spent or approved payment of 1.203 million. So between July and August, there might be just a little bit more payments that had been authorized. So that would have been the 10 to 15 claims, additional claims. And out of these claims, now I'm estimating, because I don't have an exact number, but out of the claims that we adjudicate, I would say maybe 40% of them are victims who were alive in 2016, the 2016 deadline, but now died. So they're called in this amendment, they are called survivors, or no, deceased compensable Guam victims. And deceased compensable Guam victims. And decedents are really our smallest category. That means those who died during the war who have not yet made claims. The decedents who died during the war, we've only had one of those so far. So about 40%, I'm estimating, of the 120 claims are probably deceased compensable Guam victims. One is a decedent, meaning died during the war. So those are the ones who are awaiting payment. I hope that answers at least a little bit.
Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, that's sufficient. With those numbers, then we should pay them. Even as much as I would prefer the federal government pay it, if we have the ability to pay it, and then hopefully in the very near future, somebody would argue with the federal government to reimburse us for all the payments we're making for something that they forgive the country that caused us the atrocity. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. On the amendment, are there any objections? Hearing none. You'd like to close?
Yes, please, Madam Chair. I just want to point out, in case any questions arose during our discussion, March, I use the word March, the month March, because March represents the 1 year after the beginning of the filing period. When Guam opened its own war claims and opened a filing period, a year from that would be March, meaning anyone who hasn't filed a claim must file before March. So please tell all your family and friends to apply before March. All claims will be adjudicated, after that. And we want, and the original law required that those who had died, the eligible decedents, the eligible victims, if they weren't alive, they weren't going to get paid until the very end, which was March. So this amendment again it's only again for already eligible victims or decedents who died during the war to be paid sooner rather than waiting until March.
Thank you, Speaker. Are there any objections? Hearing none, amendment passes. Speaker Terlahi, excuse me, Senator Brown, you are recognized. We are on the SB 276 JBTMB L11 P149 at 12:29 p.m. regarding the Office of the Attorney General.
Public auditor. Well, both.
Both. It is the Attorney General and the Public Auditor. Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This particular amendment was offered in relation to an amendment we dealt with last week that addressed the funding of the Office of the Public Auditor to allow independence with regards to the activities and work of the Public Auditor's Office. The original amendment were combined together and certainly try to be consistent with the sections. We divided the original amendment, and this is the second half with regards to several things that we also wanted to provide to support the Office of the Public Auditor. This amendment was part of a public hearing that was held on Bill 302 that I had introduced earlier this year, and the public hearing was held several months ago. On Section 40, one of the things that we're adding with regards to this amendment is to allow the Office of the Public Auditor, or OPA, to enter into an agreement with the Attorney General's office to address the acquisition of the assistance of an assistant attorney general to be able to help the public auditor should he determine, in this current case, Public Auditor B.J. Cruz, that any audit would require further review from the Office of the Attorney General. One of the things that we have heard, obviously, is a lack of resources. I got to wonder, with all the lapses now the AG's office has, but we wanted to ensure that that support would be available and that the Office of the Public Auditor, through their budget, would fund an assistant attorney general, legal secretary, and investigator, whose primary responsibility would be to provide legal services to OPA. The other thing that this amendment will do, and while we've been discussing issues of pay increases and wage structures, I've not been one, obviously, to be an advocate of that through this process of the budget, because I think it should go through proper review and study. But in this particular case, this issue has been longstanding, and there actually was a study that was done in 2014. So we are now here 8 years later, and this has not been fully addressed. And obviously, one of the key concerns the public auditor brought up during our public hearing, and I know he has brought it up at other times publicly, is the challenge that he has in keeping auditors within his office due to the fact that the wage structure that he currently has available is totally at a disadvantage, because he continues to lose key people in his office because they've been given other opportunities for higher salaries in other areas of the government. And so what we would be allowing by this amendment is to allow the public auditor to be able to implement this study so that he can at least address immediately the main concern he has with regards to the loss of continued staff and valued staff that he's helped train and who have been working on these audits. But again, yes, I recognize that's a reality of anyone who wants to have greater opportunity to earn increased salary and address the needs of their family. I think we can all appreciate that. In this particular case, the reason I'm an advocate for this is because the key office that's involved and has the primary responsibility of ensuring, as its title and its name, accountability with regards to how public funds are spent, to me is absolutely critical. Of course, many times we see the audit reports that the public auditor has pursued, and yet even when the public auditor finds outstanding issues, things go no further than that. And I think one of the things definitely we need to do is provide the resource so that doesn't become the issue. The issue doesn't become we don't have the resources available to further pursue these issues, because certainly if we don't believe there's corruption in the government, then we are definitely living in a different reality, because those audits do show in some cases where there's serious abuse of public resource and public finance that need to be addressed. So furthermore, that's primarily the intent of this particular amendment that's been brought forth. And while I understand, and I am very critical right now of going through the budget process and addressing salary increases, because I think we need to actually vet those issues and make sure we're not creating other problems. But in this particular case, as I mentioned, we now have $1 billion budget in this government. And if we do not have the Office of Public Accountability have the resources that they need to execute their mandates that we have given to this office, especially when we do have all this money supposedly flowing from everywhere, we should invest this in where it's needed and ensure that we have these experienced auditors that while certainly, yes, everyone can argue, oh, they're auditing, every auditor in GovGuam is auditing, the responsibilities are far more intricate and intense in terms of what's expected, because ultimately it is the work of this particular office that we and others, including our public, are going to be depending on to ensure that the people's money is properly spent and that the people's money is properly accounted for. If we do not invest this in the Office of Public Accountability that's been created to execute this mandate, then we are supporting misuse of government resources. We are supporting corruption in this government. And so certainly I'm very much an advocate of wanting to ensure that we have the mechanisms in place and we have the watchdog. Currently, our current public auditor is our former speaker, our former chief justice, our former colleague is a senator in the legislature in that position, and certainly he's well versed with many, many issues with regards to the law. But granted, he needs the resources to do it. He's been asking for the resources to do it, and sometimes even begging for the resources to do it, so that he can keep his people and execute the mandates that we have demanded of him. And where else in the government are we going to have that accountability? I think a lot of people, if you're going to ask them, do you have confidence in your government? Gosh, I don't know if that'd be a survey question. That'd probably bring a lot of question marks. And I want to have some sense of comfort. I think our public wants to have. I think our public demands a sense of comfort to ensure that the money, the money that's so easily appropriated here in this legislature, is being properly spent and spent for its intended purposes and not being used and abused. So with that, Madam Chair, I offer and proffer this amendment, and again, and this is a companion to the amendment we passed last week that actually in the upcoming fiscal year and would provide the independence with regards to funding of the public auditor's office, so that indeed the office is independent to execute its mandates as has been prescribed by law. With that, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to comment on this amendment.
Thank you very much, Senator Brown and colleagues. Just as a reminder, there is an appendix attached on the back. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
I'd like to thank the author for pursuing basically from the bill she introduced that we try to get out, but I'm just looking at the amendment, and I know it's in relation to what we passed last week. Maybe she'll yield to the question of funding for their salary increase or whatever they need to adjust. It's coming out of Hyde for now. I mean, it's coming out of their budget, and then as everything settles down in their budget, they'll just be paying for it all. If they just keep raising their salaries, just understand it's coming out of your budget. It's not something that you're going to be asking us, can we get more money? That's what I'm concerned about. And otherwise, I do support. And in reference to the OPA asking for money, every time he asks, I always tease the speaker, says, you know what we need to do. Send me the request and we'll figure out how we get you the funds. But I'm in support of this. I'm just concerned that it's out of their own budget, because their budget will be established every year after this, and not ask for supplemental, when he's supposed to be working within his budget. And if the author would yield to that, I'm in full support of this. Thank you.
Do you yield to the question, Senator Brown?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and certainly to Senator San Augustine for asking the question. Yes, Senate is recognized. We do just have a few more months left in this fiscal year. The public auditor is not asking for any additional funds to initiate this process. Certainly he will prioritize it because of the erosion to his staff. As recently as a week and a half ago, he lost another auditor. So certainly he will work within the guidelines and the amounts of his current budget. And then, of course, as we move forward, as we discussed last week, with the budget that was brought forth by the Office of Budget and Finance and the difference that was calculated that we included in the language of this budget bill that would give him the difference that he otherwise would have with the 0.25% for this upcoming fiscal year in 2023 with the implementation in 2024 of the actual percentage, the public auditor should be able to move forward expeditiously once we authorize the language.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm in support of this amendment.
Thank you very much. On the amendment, Speaker Terlahi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think anyone in here is going to object to, trying to do what the Office of the Public Accountability asks us to do so that they can keep good auditors in their office. My only concern is that this provision, again, is increasing salary scales for the entire professional staff of the Office of Public Accountability. It directs the Director of Administration to set the salaries commensurate with the highest salary paid by line agencies, autonomous and semi-autonomous agencies, so that the professional staff at the OPA shall be equal to the highest paid professional staff in any agency, autonomous, semi-autonomous, or line. But on top of that, these professional staff are already entitled to certification pay. I'm trying to see the amount. It's not here, but I think the certification pay is 15%. Is that correct? It's either 10 or 15%. But they're already entitled to certification pay if they are eligible, meaning they have a certification in certain areas. On top of that, this amendment allows those, after they are receiving the highest salary of any government agencies for that scope of work, to also be eligible to receive a 10% pay differential. So highest salaries, 10% pay differential plus certification pay. My concern is, if that's what's necessary, then perhaps that's what we have to do. But I'm very concerned that we're waiting for the Department of Administration to do a government-wide salary assessment. They've been mandated to do that. They have testified repeatedly that that is ongoing. They are doing that. And I was hoping that all of these things are going to be assessed at that time so that there would be fairness across the agencies. And we tried this with law enforcement pay in a whole different way. We set up a post to try to balance out the inequities in law enforcement pay, and I don't think we have achieved that. But on top of those inequities, we put 18% pay adjustment on everyone. And I'm just wondering if we are making equity among the agencies beyond our reach. I've heard many senators before my time complain about how we are going to get rid of that inequity that the autonomous agencies are paying their employees for sometimes identical work higher than the line agencies are able to pay. And that was a source of funding issue, and of course a pay scale adjustment issue. It's no secret that the Department of Administration and the government-wide pay adjustment is not as swift as the pay adjustments that go on in the autonomous agencies. And so, yeah, it's just this, it's the same concern I have with the judiciary doing a different pay scale than the executive branch, with the public defender doing a different pay scale for classifications of positions that might be identical to other line agencies in the executive branch, to the attorney generals doing different. Now, here, hopefully, these are, it says they're going to get it doesn't say they're going to get paid because they are doing unique work. It says they're going to get paid commensurate with the highest salary paid by autonomous and semi-autonomous agencies, line agencies, for comparable education, certification, training, and experience. And I'm just, I hope the Attorney General is looking at all of these things and that we're not, going to be creating, if there's such a position in any other agency, that we're creating a disparity there as well. That once we create those, it looks to me, based on previous cases, that the legislature is on the hook to pay all of them. Meaning we're authorizing one agency and we might inadvertently, because of our rush, end up without or on the hook for all the agencies, which I would like to be, but subject to a pay study, an organized pay study for all the agencies. And if we can effectuate those, I just feel like, of course, it's probably the better way to go. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Speaker Terlahi. On the amendment, Senator Tydekwe, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, looking at the previous amendment by the author regarding this, I noticed that on the Section 4 of the prior amendment, that passed by this body, allowing in FY24, the 0.25% of the annual total general fund gross revenue of the government of Guam. So we know that this is going to happen in FY2024, but for 2023, we also passed in the same amendment on Section 1, $371,602 to cover any increases that is needed for the OPA's office. And there's no doubt everyone here agrees that it's a very, very important agency, especially when it comes to our budget, especially when it comes to asking questions of our agencies. Every budget bill that I brought up, I've always brought the OPA's report when questioning the agency in front of me. That's where I get most of my questions from, and many times, you find a lot of indiscretions that the OPA has been able to find, and we're able to see if there's a way that it's been corrected yet, or when is it going to be corrected. But most especially, it gives us a better outlook on how much that agency really spends and how much they really need to operate. I think this is this amendment being, marrying into the first amendment that passed is conducive. It needs this type of adjustment, and allowing the OPA office in 2014 to make those adjustments with this new amount. I don't see it increasing anymore because we have increased that percentage of 0.25. But if anything, we are losing, or not we are, the OPA office is losing a lot of their people. I mean, we even took one here at this body. I mean, the Office of OFB, they have one of their individuals from OPA's office. And I don't blame them. They work hard getting their degrees and their training to be an accountant, to be able to do this type of work, and they should be compensated for it. But we rely solely on the OPA's office. We totally rely on them. And if they keep losing individuals, especially ones who've been trained and then off to an autonomous agency that's willing to pay them $10,000 to $20,000 more a year, we're in big trouble. What's even worse is the fact that we're going to be losing a major accounting firm on this island, Deloitte & Touche, is no longer going to be here. The OPA's office is going to be very, very busy. And constantly we've been asking to get the audit report way before budget time. That's one of the biggest things that we've always complained about. how come we can't get the audit at least 3 months out before today, where we're expected to pass a budget in 2 days? If we're going to demand that of the OP's office, then we should give them all the tools, all the necessary equipment and people and funding they need to get that audit report out way before our budget time. So I think this amendment it does marry the First Amendment. It provides that leeway to wait until 2024 as they cover their own expenses within their own department and what is appropriated to them. And they're covered for FY2023. So I thank you. I stand in full support of this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. On the amendment, are there any objections? Would you like to close?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You know, the Speaker brought up some very good points that I concur with. And I am concerned in passing this budget, should this budget pass, because a number of provisions have been put in this budget with regards to pay increases that have had no study, that we ultimately don't know the ultimate implications of those increases and what additional cost is going to come to the government when other sections of the government come up and say, hey, we want equity too, because we're under the impression we all should be equal. I do believe, Madam Chair, there are critical services that this government needs to provide, and I believe, and I guess we could look at the legal mechanism to do that, to ensure that the auditors that work at the Public Auditor's Office are the best and the sharpest auditors we can get because of the work that they do, and that we want them to continue to do and be specialized in. I want them to want to work at the Public Auditor's Office more than I want them to work anywhere else. But I'm open to, and I would consider, because I'm consistent, and I don't support a lot of the pay raises that have been included here that have had no study. I mean, like I said, the study's here. I can provide it for all my colleagues. 2014, some of these things weren't even envisioned beyond these amendments that have been added into this budget bill, and they're there. But this study's been sitting collecting dust, and as a result, the Public Auditor's Office has continued to lose capable, talented people who I'm sure love their job. I've had others that have said, I love working there. But, you know, I got 2 kids to raise. And I understand that. I think all of us, you know, can understand and appreciate that. But I would be open in my closing to removing Section 42, but yet leave the rest intact, particularly Section 41, so that the public auditor can immediately, as a result of this now 8-year-old study, be able to move forward and implement this so that he can hopefully keep, if not attain, additional auditors to be able to meet his mission. And I'd be willing to go back to the drawing board with the rest of Section 42, anticipating that in 2024, the public auditor will have his independent budget to operate on, to even strengthen further how we can ensure that his auditors are well compensated. Because like I said, there are certain sections of this government that I see very much as a priority that I'm willing to see have more resources to ensure that this now billion-dollar budget is properly accounted for. I mean, literally, we're only giving the public auditor just a slight amount over $2 million to oversee a billion-dollar budget. So I don't know if it'd be correct, Madam Chair, but to ensure, you know, I can come to some compromise with the concerns that have been raised, I'm willing to withdraw Section 42. I don't know if we need a break to do that or a recess to do that, if there are no objections.
If there are no objections, I'll take an amendment to strike it through.
Yes, I will strike Section 42 with the remaining Section 40, Section 41 remaining intact, and as you mentioned, strike out Section 42 so that we can further address this issue, and yet at the same time allow the public auditor to move forward with the implementation of this now 8-year-old wage study.
Are there any objections?
Madam Chair, point of order. This is now not a closing statement anymore. It is an amendment to the amendment.
In her closing statement, she is making an amendment.
To the amendment.
Well, I'm trying to
Yes, it's her
compromise.
amendment.
So now
She's
we
making
have
an
to
amendment.
debate
Compromise.
the amendment to the amendment.
I want to compromise.
Is there any objection to the amendment to the amendment? There's been an objection.
Wait, I got a question.
Yes.
There's an amendment, is it anywhere other than a spoken amendment? I'm just curious.
No.
The author is striking 42. Okay, if the author is doing that, I have no problem.
There has been an objection. On the amendment to the amendment, Senator Perez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in support of this amendment to the amendment. I too had a little reservation about the impact, and being that in the fiscal note, they didn't even have an impact in there. So I did support the First Amendment to increase the budget to reach the 0.25%, but to implement this to the highest salary paid, I do understand the need to bring parity between autonomous agencies and non-autonomous agencies. And, it's been a thorn in the side of many of our line agencies that we're losing good employees to autonomous agencies. And, but we don't know the full impact and whether the amount that we agreed to in the First Amendment would cover this. And so I rise in full support of this amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
On the amendment to the amendment, there's been an objection. All those in favor of the amendment to the amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Amendment passes. On the amendment as amended, are there any objections? There's been an objection. All those in favor to the amendment as amended, please signify by raising your hand. Amendment passes. Speaker Chirlahi, you are recognized on SB 276 TMT L11 P149 submitted at 3:49 on special pay for prosecutors.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd like to make a motion to add a new section to the bill that would read, a new 30104.1 is hereby added to Chapter 30 of Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, to read as follows. 30104.1, special pay for prosecutors. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, attorneys serving as prosecutors shall be entitled to special pay, calculated at the rate of their regular wage plus 15%. The Office of Attorney General shall provide special pay to all attorneys serving as prosecutors in the Office of the Attorney General. During the budget hearing, the Office of the Attorney General noted that there were at least 5 prosecutor vacancies in the prosecutorial division of the Attorney General's office. Since that time, they may have lost another, and we've seen even public announcements of resignations of prosecutors with a myriad of reasons cited. But the effect of the vacancies in the prosecutorial division may have serious impacts on our ability as an island to properly enforce our laws, properly prosecute crime, properly deter crime, and to bring justice. We've heard that the prosecutor positions are challenging, of course. They are difficult to recruit. And for that reason, we are proposing that they be entitled to a special pay of 15% of their regular wage. We also have heard that prosecutors have resigned, and I'm going to quote one of them. The workload and the psychological demands of this position have become detrimental to my health. The strain has become unbearable. This number when your prosecutors lack, I'm quoting here from an article, when your prosecutors lack support and morale, it is the people of Guam who suffer the most. We are the only government of Guam attorneys who work every Saturday and on holiday weekends. The only ones obligated to pick up the phone at 3 a.m. to assist the Guam Police Department with legal advice on arrests. On my first day at this office in 2012, there were 21 prosecutors and the chief prosecutor. Today, there are 10. Yet there are more trials today than there were 10 years ago. The strain has become unbearable. To say that this number causes an inability to prosecute crimes properly is an understatement. You deserve better, we all deserve better. We've seen that there are other vacancies in the Attorney General's office, including at the time of the budget hearing, 1 vacancy in the Child Support Enforcement Division, another in the Consumer Protection Division. But again, the vacancies in the Prosecutor Division, I'm actually very much hoping and praying that this amendment will be effective in helping them to recruit and attract prosecutors and to retain prosecutors who are willing to do this work. And the ones that I have met and worked with, they seem to be very dedicated to that type of work. It's not for everyone, that's for sure. And I challenge any one of us to say that it is fair to pay someone who has to put their families at risk by going in that courtroom and prosecuting sometimes lifelong defendants, major drug dealers. There is a risk to that. That is not recognized in our current pay structure. Our current pay structure treats all lawyers equal. Lawyers at the public defender, lawyers at the Attorney General's office, lawyers at a line agency, equal to our prosecutors. The ones who cannot control their schedules, they are at the mercy of the courts. They must be appealing to juries. They must seek justice when sometimes there are various challenging circumstances, including witnesses who do not want to cooperate. They're going to be publicly criticized, and many other factors. I actually looked at another way to increase their pay, such as hazardous pay, and many different ways. I looked at how the United States federal system compensates, and it's more complex, and I didn't think that that would be achievable in this amount of time, and so we came to this 15%. So that means that prosecutors would be paid 50% more than attorneys who are doing consumer protection, attorneys who are doing child support, attorneys who are doing procurement for Guam Solid Waste, attorneys who are doing collections for the hospital. I'm not sure because sometimes these autonomous agencies are setting their own salaries again. However, on the current government pay scale, this would set them apart due to a different classification of this position. The Attorney General's office has assured us that they are able to cover this 15%, that they want this increase of 15%, that they want the ability to make it more attractive for prosecutors to stay in their office and to work in their office. and that they would use their existing budget to cover this special pay and to prioritize the recruitment and retention of prosecutors. So with that, Madam Chair, I ask my colleagues to support this amendment.
Thank you, Speaker. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I heard the author of the amendment state that they'll take it out of their budget, but it's not in the amendment. I know that next year when FY24 comes in, because you make the change in the law, then it becomes a fixed cost. But right now, it's basically saying, notwithstanding any provisions of law, okay, we're going to give you 15%. We're out of appropriation. Revenue's already set. They have to take it out of Hyde first. Then next year they can make it part of their budget. Then it just continues. But right now it doesn't state where the money's coming from. And I'm in support of it. But we have to identify that it's within their budget, and they do have the money to do it. Earlier we discussed that with the 6%. So the 15 shouldn't be that major of a difference. And that's how I will support it. Otherwise, where's the 15% money coming from? There's no money, there's no appropriation here. It's just an authorization to do it. I just want to make sure that it's within their budget, 2024, because the law changed, it's part of their budget. Then we move from there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. On the amendment,
I'll speak on the amendment.
yes, Majority Leader Nelson.
Sorry, it's a little late. I didn't mean to be the chair and the, sorry. Forgive me, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just want to make sure the I support this amendment first. I just want to make sure that the regular wage plus 15%, are they going to get that in the FY23 budget? Or are we looking to make this part of GCA for FY24?
Speaker, will you yield to the question?
This amendment would add a section to the code, to the law. It would become effective immediately upon signature of the governor.
Okay, and so does the Office of the Attorney General have funding to ensure that the increase is 15% for FY23 once this is signed into law, that this bill is signed into law?
I will yield to that question as well, and thank you for the question. Yes, and the Attorney General, even today, sent us another letter confirming the amounts that they would use to cover the 6% across-the-board increase for all attorneys that was passed earlier, and for the 15% for prosecutors alone that is proposed in this amendment.
Thank you. I do agree with the sponsor that our prosecutors do long deservedly have earned this increase in their pay, and I think it's only right we give them what is just. I support the amendment.
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Yes, Madam Chair, I know I spoke earlier.
Oh,
I do have an
you have a
amendment
okay.
ready. It's going to come out to make sure we have the means to make sure to support it.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
While we're waiting on that amendment, on the Terlahi amendment, Senator Teitiglu, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question with regards to the cost of this. What amount did they say the 15% is going to yield in payment for those that are warm bodies and then vacant? So it's a question to the author. She should yield.
Speaker, do you yield to the question?
Yes, I do. That letter's on my desk here somewhere. Do you have the letter? It was a spreadsheet that they gave us with the columns. Let me just give me one more second. Oh, no, where that is here.
Madam Chair, I can provide that information the speaker's asking. I'm looking at it right now.
Sure, please proceed.
All right, warm bodies with the 6 plus the 15% would total 410,442. If it's with vacancies, it'll be 476,000 784. Okay?
So that's 410
Warm
warm
bodies.
bodies, and then it looks like an
No, no,
addition.
no, sorry. That's a total for the 6% and the 15.
Right, because the 6 already
Yeah.
passed.
It's
So
only 194,264 for prosecutors alone. This was in a letter sent August 29, 2022. Yeah, 194,267 warm bodies, 15% prosecutors pay only.
Okay, then what are the vacancies right now, if they were able to fill the vacancies?
With vacancies, they say 185,360.
Additional on top of the 194?
It's not clear, but I'll show you their table.
So with warm bodies, it's still 194,000
Yes.
plus, right? For the 15%, and then for vacancies, how many vacancies are there?
I'm not sure, but they lost 5 in one fiscal year. I think they lost more after the budget hearing, and at least, I think 1. I think there are 25, I don't know, because when asked this at the hearing, maybe OFB can say how many actual vacancies there are. But they talked about the need, that the chief prosecutor would say he needs 25 prosecutors. But the Attorney General is looking to fill 18 attorneys in total.
Okay, so they would like 25 prosecutors, but 18?
Well, he was joking that the chief prosecutor would say he needs 25.
I see.
So the AG was, advocating to hire more and to bring that up to 18 in total for fiscal year 2023. And when I asked if 18 were enough for fiscal year 2023, he said they should be able to manage through the next fiscal year with 18 prosecutors.
Madam Chair, if I can ask OFB the numbers on how many prosecutors they currently have on staff right now? I mean, it's obvious that we know the number is 18. The wish list was 25, but they think they can fill 18. So if we can just take a short recess while OFB...
We'll take a moment's
Thank you.
recess. The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's an amendment there identified as SB 276 JSSA LP 146.
I apologize,
149.
Senator San Augustine. It's getting late. I made a mistake. It was Senator Teitigui who had the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please
Okay.
excuse me.
No problem.
It's okay. It is getting late. Okay. So I was able to get the information, and just for the listening audience, the question was how many prosecutors are there and warm bodies that are working versus how many are vacant. So right now they're saying there's 17 filled positions and 6 vacant. So you're looking at that 17 filled position is at $243,185 on the 15%. And then the vacant position would cost an additional $85,830. So it's a total of $329,037 to fulfill this, if they can. Talking with the Attorney General's office, and asking them how are they going to get this funding, to do it, because we were talking earlier about any kind of lapses that they may have, and to use from FY22 or even 21. And I don't see them having that much, so I was told that in the event, they're just going to have to be able to cover the warm bodies, and that would be the priority, and then probably not be able to cover the 6 vacant, if that's the case. So those numbers were given to me. I appreciate the time from the Attorney General's office, as well as OFB, for allowing me to get this information. Thank you.
Thank you. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have an amendment. I think it was passed already to our colleagues. And basically, the amendment is to add a section to Chapter 12 miscellaneous. Further down, it has letter A. For fiscal year 2023, the special pay for prosecutors pursuant to this subsection shall be paid utilizing the appropriations of the Office of Attorney General in this act.
Thank you. On the amendment to the amendment, the San Augustine amendment to the Terlahi amendment. Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering if it's necessary to codify this, if we're just going to implement this for this year. Perhaps it could be placed, we'll have legal to, I don't know, can I get a quick recess?
We're in recess. We're back from recess. Senator Perez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that recess, and I appreciate the collegiality with my colleagues. So yeah, we're going to have legal not codify that part, since it was Masi.
Thank you very much. On the amendment to the amendment. Senator Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask the speakers, the sponsor, just so that, of course, as I mentioned also with the public auditor, we'll go back and readdress the further study of the additional compensation. But just to ask, because I know the concern was raised earlier that, if we're doing these pays in certain areas, maybe it could impact other parts or other positions in the government. I just wanted to inquire how, or does she have a comfort level that this is carved out specifically just for the prosecutors? I think we understand all the points that were relayed in terms of the additional burden that prosecutors, take on with the type of work that they do. But I just wanted to get clarity to that and get a response so that we don't create something else where, the attorney that's working for child support will go, oh, it's not fair pay. How come the prosecutor, who's an attorney who has the same years as me and whatever the case may be, how come he or she's getting paid more than I am? And I'm an attorney too, and I'm doing important work. So I just want to find out how we don't trigger that to become an issue, that we're simply, we're determining that we need the prosecutors, it's a critical need in order to do that and retain them like we allow GMH with regards to the doctors that they hire. How does that differentiate to not create a situation where you're going to ask for parity, that we always hear about parity? So if I could just inquire that question of the speaker, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would yield, and I think it's actually an excellent question. It is the question of the day, right? Whether these create additional disparities or address parities. I think it will be incumbent on the Attorney General's office to ensure that the position description in the prosecutor's office, as I have discussed with them, is also rectified, right? So that it is clearly different requirements, qualifications than the other attorneys in that office.
And Madam Chair, if I can further inquire, is the Attorney General at this point prepared, or has he already prepared to anticipate the possibility of this, so that, again, there's no time lag between the implementation of perhaps the new, requirements for the position, so we don't end up with a challenge regarding other attorney positions at the AG's office?
I know that they've been working on it, Madam Chair. Sorry. Yeah, I will yield. They've been working on it. I can't guarantee any of that. I think we do face a risk with the other raises that were adopted previously in other departments, but within the same department, I would leave that to them. That they've said that this language would suffice.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Chair, I certainly hope the Attorney General moves very quickly to proper address this. I mean, I understand the need. I mean, it's a challenging position for anyone. And I do recognize, as I mentioned earlier, there are key critical positions in this government where we do, in order to get the quality people that we need that have the expertise and experience, that are credentialed, to serve in these positions, because they're very demanding. They're demanding more than the average position that we have. And while I know we're always trying to get equity, sometimes there's certain positions that do require that. They require the educational credentials, the experience, and again, the type of work that's being done. I mean, it's like, a fireman that works on an ambulance, to me, is, additional skills versus the training just to fight fires. So we understand that in that case, certainly you should have higher compensation. That's why you want to encourage people to continue to improve their skills and hopefully fill these critically needed positions. And there are areas in the government we should be able to prioritize, like the doctors at GMH, or specialty skills that we want them to have to come out to Guam or be here on Guam or stay on Guam, to have that additional compensation. So I just think we just need to clarify that, because I think we're heading in a situation with this budget. At one end, we have pay increases that have been put in here that may quickly trigger that question, and others, again, we want to be able to say, hey, this is a priority. These are critical positions in the government that we feel are exceptional positions that provide specialty services, and we feel and we need to address the compensation in order to keep, retain, or attract them. So with that, thank you to the Speaker for responding. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to ask these questions.
Thank you. On the amendment to the amendment, Senator Blasio are recognized. Oh, wait for the amendment. On the amendment to the amendment, are there any objections? Would you like to close? Hearing no objections, amendment to the amendment passes. On the amendment as amended, Senator Blasio are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I question if the author of the amendment could yield to this. Where did 15% come from?
Speaker, do you yield to the question?
Thank you. Yes. This is special pay, so I modeled it after other special pay in the codes, and one of them was, I want to show you, I'm pretty sure hazardous pay. Another one was, sorry. There were other sections in the code that say the word special pay, and they also use 15%.
Thank you. And I get, really, with I guess the question that I was getting at, that I wanted to really get at is, hi, here we go again. We're going to another pay raise or pay incentive. No plan, no study, no justification, no reason. And I appreciate and I recognize the presentation from the author. This is not going to be effective until the start of the fiscal year. This is only August. If we really want to do this, we still got a whole month of September to be able to work something out so that it can be implemented. And, and I appreciate, well, it says here that now that the funding is going to be coming from the appropriations provided for fiscal year 2023. What is that impact down the road? And okay, again, I think I can speak for authority here by saying, yeah, that I'm glad that we're finally addressing or trying to address, areas with regard to the prosecutors. But if I remember the concerns that were presented from those prosecutors or those individuals that, left the office and had open discussions, it was more than just the pay that drove them out of there. Okay? And are we just going to throw them, provide these raises and think that everything is going to be now hunky-dory? There are 3 members of this body that can relate directly to having to deal with hardened criminals. At a time when not only did we not get pay raises, but we didn't get overtime for sometimes 3-4 years. And it was about dedication. But it was also about support. And I'm not comforted in knowing that just because we're going to give this person a pay raise that now they're going to do their jobs. It's more than that. And I don't want to get into a conversation that's not relevant to this amendment. We basically in the last hour had to spend time looking for the information to justify this. Or to answer some of the questions. Not all of them, just some of them. And, it's not to sound like I favor this over that, or it's, come on, guys. I still can't wrap my arms around how we're going to get to the revenues that were needed for this budget. And now we're spending everything that we think we're going to get. There's authorization in this bill as well as existing authorization to conduct comprehensive studies. And I'm sure the private sector employee who's still waiting to be able to get a full-time job that he's lost because of what happened over the last 3 years is asking, what about me? And I'm sure there are going to be other attorneys in other areas that are going to say, what about us? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Blas. On the amendment as amended, would you like to close?
Yes, Madam Chair, and thank you. And thank you to my colleagues for their excellent questions. And of course, this is not a guarantee. Just like giving that money to the hospital to hire specialists, it's not a guarantee that we're going to actually get specialists. They're keeping in mind that the challenges that we are facing. But I really do believe that this is something that is worth taking a risk on. Because without prosecutors or overburdened prosecutors, dissatisfied prosecutors, we have a revolving door, they call it, right, of persons getting arrested, charged, released, pleaded out or go to trial and not convicted. And I think we should support them. I absolutely think this is part of that support that is necessary there. And more importantly, I didn't hear any objection, maybe except my own, to the judiciary giving all of its employees 6% pay raise, to the public defender giving all of its employees 6% pay raise. But I really believe that this particular special pay, which of course we got this language from the Attorney General's office, and we also got notes from them that say 15% is the specialty pay for nurses and healthcare professionals, environmental public health officers, certified public accountants, and other certified financial managers, examiners, and auditors. And I made my own notes of hazardous pay and the differential pay for corrections and Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center officers. And we are taking a risk, but a calculated risk, and we are putting in a lot of hope. I sure am. I do not believe it's a guarantee. I agree with all the previous speakers as to that. If there are other conditions that make working there not attractive, this is not going to fix those. But if this special pay can attract some, then I say let's try that while we continue to address the other issues, or while the Attorney General himself continues to address the other issues. But I don't think that we can afford to do nothing right now, and I think that the people of Guam, facing the crime that they are facing, I think
Thank you, Speaker.
they deserve this risk.
Thank you.
Mrs. Masi.
On the amendment as amended, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, amendment as amended passes. Colleagues, the time now is 9:45. We will recess until tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Situus Masi, and have a safe evening.